Resistance fuels speculation. I'm Michael Smerconish in the Philly Burbs. There are several updates regarding the Jeffrey Epstein saga. First, the DOJ has acquiesced to President Trump's demand that it investigate a list of powerful men mentioned in the recently released emails. One name missing from the list of those to be investigated, the president himself. Second, a House vote to release the government's records on Epstein could come as soon as Tuesday. That vote would never happen without the 4 Republicans who signed the discharge petition: Thomas Massie, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Nancy Mace. If and when the final vote is taken, many Republicans who would not sign the discharge petition, are now expected to support the release. A third development: Trump has now broken from Marjorie Taylor Greene over, among other things, her advocacy for release of the Epstein materials. Trump called Greene wacky and said that he will support a primary opponent of hers. The one consistency to all of this, the continued resistance by the president and the White House to full disclosure, which begs the question, why obfuscate if you've nothing to hide, especially where the emails released to date, they might be cringeworthy, but they're certainly not incriminating of the president. Mr. President, take advice from someone who answers the telephone for a living and heard from callers this week eager to offer their thoughts. The White House resistance to the full release of whatever the government is holding is only fueling additional speculation. Let's start with what's uncontroverted. First, while the president has never been accused by law enforcement of any wrongdoing connected with this relationship, he was once friendly with a bad guy. Second, their relationship is memorialized in lots of pictures, some videos, and many emails like those which we saw this week, which were seized by subpoena from the Epstein estate by the House Oversight Committee. Third, the White House and Republicans have gone to great lengths to oppose the release of further information about Epstein and, by extension, Trump. As for what's in doubt or subject to more questions, there's that 2002 quote from New York Magazine when Trump said, "I've known Jeff for 15 years, terrific guy, he's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side." Younger, not necessarily minor, certainly cringeworthy, but not incriminating in terms of knowledge. If Trump knew that Epstein was a pedophile, I seriously doubt he'd have told New York Magazine anything about Epstein's proclivities. Fast forward to 2011, an email getting lots of attention this week from Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell. It's another Rorschach test. What's meant by the dog that hasn't barked is Trump. At that time, Trump was the star of The Apprentice. He was talking about running for president. Epstein had served less than 12 months of an 18-month sentence after striking a plea deal for solicitation of prostitution and solicitation of prostitution with a minor. It would be 8 years before he would be indicted again. That barking dog reference comes from a Sherlock Holmes story where the dog notably didn't bark because the intruder was familiar. So who's the intruder in this case? It sounds like Epstein is commenting upon Trump's silence at that moment. And from the same email, police chief, etc., I'm 75% there. I have no idea what's meant, but it occurs to me that Ghislaine Maxwell probably knows, and nothing stops her from explaining the meaning of all these emails from behind bars. As for Epstein saying that Trump spent hours at his house with one of the women, that's also in the email. Democrats redacted the name, but Virginia Giuffre has been identified by the Republicans. Remember, she under oath stated that she believed Trump didn't know of Epstein's wrongdoing, and in her posthumously released memoir, Nobody's Girl, made no allegations about Trump. Writing in part, in the summer of 2000, she wrote in Nobody's Girl, "My father, then a maintenance man at Trump's Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, got me a job as a $9 an hour locker room attendant. Trump couldn't have been friendlier, telling me it was fantastic that I was there. Do you like kids?" he asked. "Do you babysit at all?" He explained that he owned several houses next to the resort that he lent to friends, many of whom had children who needed tending. Okay, leap now to 2019. Epstein is now emailing journalist Michael Wolff. For context, Trump is in his 3rd year in the White House, and Epstein is now the subject of a Miami Herald investigation showing that he'd been afforded lenient treatment by former U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta, who now is serving in the Trump cabinet as the labor secretary. Quote, he asked Ghislaine to stop. There it is in the email. Stop what exactly? Stop recruiting from Mar-a-Lago, presumably. And then February 1, 2019, Epstein, interestingly, sends an email to himself 5 months from being arrested, Trump knew of it and came to my house many times during that period. He never got a massage. So Epstein is both claiming some level of awareness on the part of Trump and recording that Trump himself was not a participant. And of course, Ghislaine Maxwell has said that Trump never acted improperly and called him a gentleman. Still, the president and his allies have acted like he's got something to hide. On Wednesday, the day that Democrats released 3 cherry-picked emails and Republicans released 20,000 more, the president was reportedly playing telephone tag with Nancy Mace while Representative Lauren Boebert met in the White House Situation Room with AG Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel to get them to withdraw the support of the discharge petition. That was after the release of the documents that I've referenced. Think about this. If the damage was now done, what point did it serve trying to get Boebert and or Mace to change their position on the discharge petition, unless there's even more out there which concerns the White House? Yesterday, the president was still on the attack. The Democrats are doing everything in their withering power to push the Epstein hoax again, he wrote. Despite the DOJ releasing 50,000 pages of documents, don't waste your time with Trump. I have a country to run. As I said, only 4 Republicans supported the discharge petition, which forced the upcoming vote in the House on the release of the government's Epstein materials. Far more than 4 will now vote for the public release because nobody wants to stand for re-election and have to answer for protecting a pedophile. Then it'll be up to the Senate. And should both houses vote for release, a dramatic moment will come when President Trump must either sign or veto the move to release these materials. Which brings me to today's poll question at Smerconish.com. Will the public ever see the government files on Jeffrey Epstein? Joining now is Barry Levine. He's the author of The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Okay, I want to drill down, Barry. I'm so glad that you're here. On that 2011 email, we'll put it up on the screen, and I will ask you, the dog that hasn't barked is Trump. What do you think he's referring to?
Well, I think Jeffrey Epstein is referring to the fact that he believes that Donald Trump talked to Michael Ryder, who was the Palm Beach police chief in 2004, and began the first investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. I suspect that Jeffrey Epstein, in his conversation or email with Maxwell, was saying he was 75% there, believing that Trump might have been the whistleblower at the time. Again, you have to remember that particular year, the 2 men had a falling out, not only over the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell was taking young women from his spa at Mar-a-Lago for Jeffrey Epstein, but they also had a nasty real estate deal that both men were trying to get. So there was bad blood between the 2 of them.
Okay, so it's a combination then of the Trump being the dog who didn't bark and that additional line on that email. We'll put it back on the screen. Police chief, etc. I'm 75% there, meaning he's 75% there to believing that Trump is an informant against him?
That is what I believe based on my research of years of the Jeffrey Epstein story.
Okay, but
you also have to
Barry,
remember that
Barry,
the House Speaker at one point,
Barry, if Donald Trump were an informant, if Donald Trump dropped the dime on Jeffrey Epstein, why wouldn't he today, in this climate, be shouting it from the mountaintops? I'm the one who put him away.
That's a question that only the president can answer. And again, the Palm Beach police have never said that Donald Trump was an informant. However, not too long ago, the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, said that Donald Trump was an informant on this particular case. So it is rather confusing.
Okay, let's go to the next email. January 31, 2019, the email to Michael Wolff. Of course, he knew about the girls. He asked Ghislaine to stop. What's this a reference to?
I believe, again, that's a reference to the fact that Ghislaine was taking young women from the Mar-a-Lago spa and taking them to Jeffrey Epstein's house. We know for a fact Virginia Giuffre, the primary accuser, discussed that when she was a spa attendant at Mar-a-Lago, and Maxwell took her over to Epstein's house, which then began 4 years of what Virginia said was sexual slavery.
February 1, 2019, the very next day, strangely now, it's Epstein emailing himself. First of all, why do you think he's sending an email to himself? I do this from time to time to memorialize, to preserve my memory. What thoughts does Barry Levine have as to why Jeffrey Epstein would have written a memo to himself?
Well, I do think at the time, the Miami Herald series, Perversion of Justice, Epstein knew that the feds would be closing in on him, and I think he was memorializing his connection to Donald Trump at the time. And I think that he might have suspected that he was going to be arrested, which he was eventually.
In other words, Barry, are you saying Epstein wasn't writing it for himself? He was writing it perhaps for law enforcement in the future?
That's what I suspect, Michael. Yes.
OK, a contradiction, it seems, of sorts. Again, if we could put back on the screen this February 1 to himself. Trump knew of it, he says, in part, but he never got a massage. There it is. In fact, there it is. Trump knew of it and came to my house many times during that period. The testimony of the houseman confirmed it. He never got a massage. What's going on in this recollection?
Well, I think that Epstein is discussing that that Trump was aware of some of the activities that might have been going on there. The whole question really comes down to was not necessarily that Donald Trump did anything wrong. He's never been accused of any wrongdoing related to Jeffrey Epstein. But how much did Donald Trump really know of Jeffrey Epstein's conduct? The two men socialized together a great deal back in the 90s. And you have to wonder, at some point, Donald Trump is a smart man. When did he figure out, when did the light bulb go off in his head that this was a bad guy? And if so, what did he do with that information? And the only way I think we're really going to find out about that is if we see the full, complete transparency of the Epstein files that the DOJ is holding on to.
Well, OK, that's fair. And this is a week where 20,000 documents have just been made public. And I think it needs to be reiterated. There's nothing in there that anybody's aware of that's incriminating toward the president. If there were, that would be leading all the newscasts today. Much gets made of that New York Mag quote, and you may have heard my opening thoughts on it. Trump is a smart guy. I can't imagine he would have made any comment about Epstein's proclivities if at the time he believed Epstein to be a pedophile. That just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't make sense. Also, as we continue to investigate this story for years and years, we're finding out that Donald Trump, that quote might have been manufactured and quoted directly to Donald Trump, when in fact it might have been written for him. So these are questions that New York Magazine and the writer of that article possibly could answer.
OK, a final thought, because I'd love to hear Barry Levine weigh in on this. You heard me at the outset. I said that resistance only fuels speculation. I mean, people calling a radio show like mine on Sirius XM, and I'm sure others, everybody wants to float their theory and so forth. If nothing's come out that's incriminating relative to the president, what thought do you have as to why it's still an air of a campaign of resistance that he's caught up in?
Well, we do know that Pam Bondi told him that, in fact, he is in the FBI files. And for whatever reason, whether it's fear of embarrassment or something more sinister, he does not want those files released. He calls the whole thing a hoax. What we have to deal with are the facts. Representative Thomas Massie said last month that there's 20 men that the FBI is aware of that were suspects of Epstein's sex trafficking. These are prominent individuals. We need to see from the files, what the FBI did over the years to investigate those men, and can any individuals today still be brought to justice? That's what the victims want, and that's what the victims need.
That sounds fair. Barry Levine's book, by the way, is terrific. There's my tabbed up copy, which is dog-eared and so forth, if you want to see the definitive account, The Spider. What are your thoughts at home? Hit me up on social media, and I'll read some throughout the course of the program from the world of X. Follow me on X. I don't think if everything was released, people would believe there wasn't more out there. Well, Joe, that's a great point to be made, which is to say nothing is going to satisfy everyone in this case, no matter what the record might ultimately show. I don't want to be repetitive. I've already said what I want to say. I get it. This is cringeworthy. The president's association with a guy who turns out to be a very bad guy is an embarrassment to him. But there's nothing in the record that's incriminating toward the president. And where we've already seen so many documents, I just don't get the continued resistance. It'll be interesting to see if it gets through the House and the Senate, what President Trump ultimately does. Which is today's poll question. Go to Smerconish.com and answer, will the public ever see the government files on Jeffrey Epstein? Up ahead, the median age of all home buyers has hit an all-time high of 59. Yeah, 59, the median. You didn't hear me wrong. Realtor magazine, they had to swap their cover from a young couple expecting to a more realistic pic of seniors buying. We'll discuss what's going on in the housing market next. Be sure to sign up for the Smerconish.com daily newsletter when you're voting, for which Steve Breen drew this.